So you told us we're supposed to stay up here. You said you'd call us up, right?
Yeah.
We're here.
You
Did we get the cue wrong?
got the key wrong.
Well, guess what we didn't get wrong? It's your birthday, Jim. So that's why the kids are still here too. We didn't forget about you, but we'd love if the kids want to come up and get a front row seat and sing really loud to Pastor Jim.
All right.
We're going to have some music behind to help out, but if you, or even if you're not a kid and you want to come up and sing,
on up.
we have a little bit of a happy birthday to Jim. So when we get to happy birthday, dear, you can say whatever you want. Oh, look at this. Fantastic. Let's bring it. All right, we're going up all the way on the stage. Come on, kiddos. I love it. I love it. Do you know the words to happy birthday? Fantastic. I love it. We don't even wear sombreros
Come
and
on
bring,
over here,
you know.
kids. Might as well come on
Yeah,
over here.
surround him. This is good. This is getting better than I could have imagined. All right. So, kiddos, I'm going to have, go, you can, why don't you go to them, Jim?
Oh, I'll go to
There we go. All right, friends, here we go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. All right, kids can be dismissed. Thank you.
What's the number? Is that what you asked? Yeah. Actually, for the record, I'm not celebrating my birthday this year. I'm going to postpone it till next year. So, wow. I was going to talk about something this morning. I forgot what it was. Hey, have you ever had a faith crisis? Have you ever had a faith crisis? I mean, this is a common experience for people of faith to go through, a faith crisis. And we're going to spend one more week in this doubt versus certainty conversation before we kick off into Advent. You might be tricked by all the Christmas trees and wreaths and all the pretty lights, but we're not there yet. So before we get there, I want you to think for just a few minutes about a faith crisis. You can't predict when one might hit you. You can't always tell what might bring on a faith crisis. You can't even tell who will go through one. But the reality is most Christ followers, most people of faith go through a faith crisis at some point in their lives. And so while we can't predict what brings a faith crisis on in our lives, Jesus was heading toward the cross. And as he's heading toward the cross, he sees a faith crisis coming for his followers. He knows it. It's coming. It's going to hit. And so he pulls them aside. In fact, in the book of Luke chapter 22, we're going to be there just a moment today, but Luke 22, Jesus pulls Peter aside, and here's what he says to Peter. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you've turned back, strengthen your brothers. What does it mean? Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. I mean, it almost sounds like in the book of Job, when Satan appears before God and wants to test Job. It almost sounds like that. Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, as you sift the grain of wheat from the chaff. And it's strange language. He's asking permission to test the disciples. Now, But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Just because somebody has tremendous faith crisis, it doesn't mean that their faith has failed. In fact, everything needs testing. And our faith is no different. Our faith is going to be tested. You are going to go through moments where your faith is tried and tested. Everything needs tested. I have a picture from 1923. Let's put that picture up there. All right, can you see what's happening there? They're testing a bulletproof vest, right? I don't think they do the testing like that anymore. Because all it has to do is go bad one time. And you're never going to do that one again. Testing. But everything gets tested. And so my dad used to have a 1936 Ford. And we were tearing it apart. And the exhaust manifold, we were taking the exhaust manifold off. And this car had sat in a pile for years and years, untested. When it was time to tear off this exhaust manifold, and I had a wrench, and I was cranking on the bolt that goes into the exhaust manifold, and I was testing its strength, and it failed. Snapped right off. And then you have a broken bolt in your engine block, and it's not good. Life is hard. I mean, it's hard. It is. It's hard. And it's going to test you. It's going to test you. It's going to test me. And not only is life going to test you, Satan, the enemy of your soul, will also test you. He'll try to sift you as wheat, to see what's in there, to see what your faith is made of, to see what's left inside. What kind of things bring on a crisis of faith? There's all kinds of things that bring on a crisis of faith. Deep disappointment can create a crisis of faith for us. Have you ever just been so disappointed? You thought everything was heading in one direction, and then you come to find out, no. And you're so disappointed. And it tests your faith. God, I believed it was heading in that direction, and now, no. Deep disappointment tests our faith. A relational breakup tests your faith. A divorce, you didn't see it coming, but there it is. And now it tests your faith. A divorce of family members. It might not even be you that went through the divorce. It might be somebody in your family or even in your circle. Because when your family, someone in your family goes through a divorce, it's the whole family that goes through the divorce. Especially come Thanksgiving or Christmas. Because that person now is missing. That brokenness is felt by everyone. And you look at that person or those people and you say, you were supposed to be the ones who were strong. You were supposed to be solid. And it tests our faith. An accident, right? Or an act of violence, or a suicide, or a terrible diagnosis. I mean, these things test us to the core. They shake us. And so we go through these things, and they shake out what's inside of us. I remember in college, my freshman year in college, there was a guy who was 2 years older than me who we interacted with a little bit, and he disappeared for a while. He was gone for 2 or 3 weeks, and when he came back, there was something wrong, and so we asked him what had happened, and his mother was murdered while he was at school. His mother was murdered, and they didn't know who did it. Talk about testing your faith. And here I am, a freshman in college. I had no words for him, no comfort. There was nothing. He was just going through this horrible time. And we discover that God doesn't always protect. That tests your faith because your kids, you pray with them at night that God would protect them, but come to discover God doesn't always protect. And that tests your faith. Depression. The darkness won't lift. Test your faith. And loneliness. You know, that's the thing. There's more and more studies coming out about how loneliness is this silent pandemic, right? And it's impacting us. And the younger your generation, the more people tend to be impacted by loneliness, because social media is more of a thing for the younger generation. And while it's meant to draw us together, it actually isolates us. And so we get so lonely and we're impacted. So those are just a few examples of the things that can kick us into a crisis of faith. The Titanic was made, and they said it's unsinkable, right? And what happened? It sunk. And so Peter is there, and Jesus is saying, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. And Peter says, my faith is unsinkable. It's unsinkable. It doesn't matter what comes my way. I will stand by you anyway, Jesus. Jesus replies, before the roaster, where's your mind, Jim? Before the rooster crows 3 times, you will deny that you even know me. Scriptures tell us that those things came to pass. That Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and then the rooster crowed. And Peter felt horrible. And then they took Jesus to the cross, and they crucified him. And then they placed him in a tomb, and 3 days went by. Then the impossible happened. Utterly impossible. It is totally, absolutely, completely impossible that people don't just rise from the dead. Unless the God of all creation, the God who holds life and death in his hands, the God who designed everything, the God who made the stars and all of it, unless that God steps in and breathes life back into Jesus, as he did. So the disciples, they don't know this. They don't know what's happened. Jesus is dead and gone and buried, and they're together in the upper room, and they're afraid. And then Mary appears, Mary Magdalene. She appears and rushes in, and she says, I've seen the Lord. He's alive. I met him in the garden. And they're like, what are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. Did she see a vision? Was it real? What had happened? And they weren't sure what to think. And they doubted, because it seemed so absurd. And yet maybe they believed, that they didn't know what to do with any of this. So we come to John chapter 20, verse 19. The disciples are together in this room trying to figure out what in the world has happened. And they're terrified. They're afraid for their lives. They're in a time of tremendous grief. And yet now there's this word from Mary. What is happening? John 20, verse 19. On the evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. And with that, he breathed on them and said, receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven. He's alive. It doesn't make any sense. It's impossible. It's totally, absolutely, utterly impossible, except he's alive because God gave him life. And they moved from doubt to certainty. They moved from grief to joy. They moved from fear to fearlessness. Everything changed for them. Suddenly, terrified that the Romans are going to come and take them away too, fear's gone. Terrified that the Jewish leaders would turn on them, fear is totally gone. What can they do to us now? Kill us? We'll breathe again, just like him. So fear was gone. Have you ever missed something big? Like, there's a big game on TV, and you're there, and you're with your friends, and you're watching the big game. And you decide now would be a time to go to the kitchen and get something to eat. And you go to the kitchen, and then you hear cheers back in the room that you were watching the game, and you rush back in, and you missed it. The big play that turned the game. This is going to be the thing that people will be talking about all year long. This was the big moment, and you were getting some nachos and cheese, right? You missed it. Maybe it's bigger than the big game. I remember it was 2001, the year 2001, September 11th. Our family was on vacation. We were at the Lake of the Ozarks. We were staying in a friend's cabin, and they'd given us the keys to their boat, and we were having a great time. We were out on the water that morning, and the water was still, and there was only one other boat out there. And it was such an odd thing because I'd never been on the Lake of the Ozarks in September. I didn't know what to expect, but there was only one other boat. I'm like, maybe that's the way it works in September. Quiet. So our family, there's only 4 of us at the time. Leslie, myself, Hope, who was young, and Abby, who was younger. And we were laying on a hammock in the yard, and a car pulled up to the cabin next to us. And a woman got out, and she was doing something, and then she started coming over toward us, and she was visibly shaken. Something was wrong. And she says, "You haven't heard, have you? We're at war. And there was an attack in New York and in Washington, D.C., and we're at war, and we don't know who it is." And she's, it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. And we're like, "Thank you for telling us." And so we go into the house, and we turn on the TV, which is hooked into a Nintendo game, and there's no cable. There's no cable. And so we're putting like, there you go, tinfoil. I knew you'd get it. Tinfoil on the antenna, and to try to get, and there's no signal, and we're picking up something we can see. Something's happening, but we can't quite see what it is. Okay, turn on the radio, and you can hear a little bit, but there's no real radio stations. It's out. Okay, let's do this. Something is really wrong. Let's pack up and get out of here. So we pack up the car, and we take off while we could still get home, because we had no idea what was happening. Let's get home while we can still get home. And as we're driving home, we start to hear on the radio, because we pick up a station, we start to hear what we had missed. We had no idea. We had missed it. We were in a hammock. We missed it. Have you ever missed something big? So the disciples, they're all together. And that's the best place to be. When you find yourself in a faith crisis, the best place to be is surrounded by other people of faith, even if they're in a faith crisis with you. It's the best place to be because you can draw on each other's strength. You can stand together and comfort each other. You can be, even in a crisis, surrounded by others. It matters. And so they're there together, surrounded by friends. But except for Judas. Judas was gone. He'd hung himself out of grief and guilt. And Thomas was also missing. We don't know where Thomas was. Jesus doesn't tell us. John doesn't tell us where Judas was. You know, some people, though, when you're going through a faith crisis, some people pull away. It's just their nature. Some of you do it too, right? You're in a faith crisis, and so you pull away. You're like an animal that goes and licks its wounds, right? That's how many of us are wired. And so Thomas, apparently, we don't know, but Thomas is not in the room. And Jesus appears in the room. And he speaks to everyone there in the room. But Thomas is not there. Verse 24. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But that doesn't make sense. Dead people don't come back to life. It doesn't make any sense. And maybe you saw a vision. Maybe you're trying to convince each other that he's alive, but how can this be? It just doesn't make sense. Thomas must have believed he has wasted 3 years of his life following Jesus, trying to be a disciple. A disciple is somebody who tries to takes their dream for their life and everything that they've ever wanted to do and be, and they set that aside and they take on the dream and the vision and the mission of the rabbi. Now their goal is to become like the teacher. They're going to be a reflection of, an exact copy of the teacher. And so Thomas' life goal at this point was to be a carbon image of Jesus. Thomas must have believed that it had all been a waste. It was a pipe dream. You know, I used to think that pipe dream meant this, that there was a pipe that kind of went off into nowhere and meant nothing. You know, it led to nowhere. Then I'm like, what is a pipe dream? And I looked it up. And a pipe dream is like in the olden days when people would smoke opium, they would have a dream. And they would wake up from the dream and nothing was real that they dreamt about. And I'm not saying Thomas was smoking a pipe, but I am saying it was like that. It was a pipe dream. He was following with everything he had, only to discover it was all a waste. And now these crazy disciples are telling him he's alive. So what is he going to do? Thomas grieves. He's grieving both the death of Jesus and the death of this life he was trying to put in himself. The death of his faith. Now, I've got to be careful here. I am not scolding Thomas for not being there. I'm not scolding him. And I'm not scolding you when you're not there either. If you pull away and go off and lick your wounds, I'm not scolding you. Because we don't know what Thomas was going through in his not there-ness. We don't know. We don't know what he was dealing with. What we do know is Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. And so he was sifting Thomas. Look what Jesus does not do with this encounter. We're not going to put it up on the screen, but I want to read to you verse 19 again. On the evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and says, "Where is Thomas?" He doesn't say that, does he? He comes and he stands among them. Jesus knew that Thomas was being sifted. He knew where he was. He knew what the questions were in his heart. He knew that he was struggling. But Thomas' not there-ness led him to miss some really important things. He missed the divine peace of God when Jesus says, "Peace be with you." He missed that. He missed the mission that Jesus placed on the disciples when he says, "I am sending you." He missed the breath that Jesus breathed on them when he says, "Receive my spirit." Dead men don't breathe, do they? But Jesus breathed the Spirit on them. He's not dead. He missed the authority that the other disciples now had to forgive sins or not forgive sins. See, the other disciples, they all moved on. They all walked forward. Their time of grief was over. Their time of fear was past. They're all melted away. They were now filled with joy, filled with courage. But Thomas was still overwhelmed with doubt. I'm sure he wanted to believe. So maybe you find yourself in a place of crisis. Maybe it seems like everybody else is in a different place, but you're in a place of crisis. Maybe your doubts are speaking louder than your faith. Maybe you just weren't there. Verse 24, again. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Let's think for just a moment more about Thomas. What did he do right? Well, he went back. He went back to the rest of the disciples. He had withdrawn. He was all by himself, but he turned back, if you will. He turned back, and he had surrounded himself with these other men of faith. Again, he'd gone back. Why did Jesus allow a week to go by? Why did Jesus allow Thomas to remain in this in-betweenness for a week? Jesus could have gone and found Thomas. "Hey, Thomas, I noticed you weren't with the others." He could have gone wherever Thomas had gone off to lick his wounds. He could have showed up there and said, "Hey, it's over. I'm good." But he didn't. Instead, he allowed Thomas time. He allowed the sifting to happen. He allowed Thomas to wait till he was ready to turn back himself. Remember in that first passage I read where Jesus was talking to Peter and he said, "And when you, Peter, when you have turned back, go back and strengthen the brothers." He's waiting for Thomas to turn back himself. Satan had sifted Thomas. And finally, there was still something there, a remnant of faith. And so Thomas turned back. And it seemed that in his turning back, that was all it took for Jesus to step back in and encounter Thomas. It's good news for us. Actually, it's great news for us because Satan will sift you like wheat. Satan will sift us. Your faith will be tested. And when you turn back with others, you will find yourself coming face to face with Jesus. It's one of the reasons it's so critical that we gather with other believers. It's so important that we turn back and strengthen one another. Maybe there are people that you know who are being tested. Their faith is being tested. People you love. A brother, a sister, a child, a grown child, a grandchild. Somebody you know who has turned away and they've gone off and their faith is being sifted. And it's been a long time. It's been more than a week. And you're like, wow, will they ever turn back? And you ache for them. I encourage you to do this. Do exactly what Jesus did. Pray that their faith may not fail. Pray that their faith may not fail. Even in the testing, pray that their faith may not fail. Actually, I'm going to invite the band to come back up and sing Happy Birthday to me again. Now come back up. But here's what I want to challenge us to do. If you're being tested, and you have turned back, look for him because he will encounter you again. But if there's somebody in your life, somebody you love, somebody whose faith is being tested and you see it and you knew they had faith once and you want to call it back, pray that their faith may not fail. But I want to encourage you to do a little bit more today for that situation. And we're going to stand and we're going to sing, but while we sing this song, on this side of the room, there's a little square on the wall. It's a place where you can write down a prayer and stick it in there. And over here, there's a little square on the wall. And it's a little place where you can write down a prayer and stick it in the wall. What I want us to do is I want us to write down, if you have somebody in your life and you're praying that their faith may not fail, and you would like us, both our prayer team and our staff, to pray all throughout Advent for that person by name. You might be the only person calling that person's name out to the Lord. If you would like the staff and our prayer team to call their name out before God, I encourage you, while we sing, to go and write down their name and curl it up and stick it in the prayer wall in that little screen. If you don't want to write their whole name, just write their initials. But take a moment, and we will pray that this Advent season, they would turn back. That's what we're going to pray. And we'll pray with you. And so I invite you to stand as we sing together. And if you would like to respond in your own way, go write their name down and stick it in the wall. We will be praying this Advent season up till Christmas for them by name.